session. And the reason why that's important in terms of this focus on building institutions, including bureaucratic institutions of government and also private economic institutions like businesses that develop European Union business strategies that focus upon European markets, business strategies that shape and develop Siemens or what's a big Swiss, that big Swiss pharmaceutical company, Sanofi? Is that the one based in Switzerland? Or these big French or German or Italian corporations in any field that they reflect the incentives of the European Union to expand their marketplace, expand their business strategy, their economic activity to a broader European market, reflecting the incentives and the drives to encourage them to do that. That's great. Economic and bureaucratic interests, material interests of people that want more profit, shareholders and who want more money, as well as government actors who become bureaucrats and civil servants who expand their activities and their attitudes towards a European orientation and their own career success as individuals within bureaucracies and government and bureaucratic organizations themselves. Yeah, those are material interests. But the challenge that we see emerging again and again and again is the challenge of nationalism. And I know I keep coming back to this, but if the European Union really is going to be a peace strategy, it has to deal with the challenge of nationalism. And nationalism will not go away. Nationalism emerges in particular situations and contexts, particularly when societies are going through great change and turmoil. And and you see that when societies are going through accelerated pace of change and instability within their national communities, that nationalism will emerge. And we briefly talked about what is nationalistic behavior. We already talked about that in this class. What is nationalistic behavior? And the point I'm going to make here is that nationalism during these times of crisis overrides interest group behavior, like economic interest group behavior, corporate interest group behavior, material interests, overrides government bureaucratic vested interests. Nationalism can associate with and infuse bureaucratic organizations with nationalism, and those bureaucratic organizations, whether they be private economic entities or different government ministries, the military, the State Department, the foreign ministry, they can all be nationalistic, but of course, what it means to be an American nationalist, well, since it's not a class in the United States, you stick with here. If you're a French nationalist and you're in the French Ministry of Finance and in the French Commerce Ministry, you're probably going to emphasize more the well-being and influence of France in the business world and promoting the European Central Bank as a way by which for France to play a leading role for France's pride and glory and well-being in the world through Europe, versus somebody who is in the French military who's going to emphasize promoting France through military orientation, namely maybe emphasizing more the importance of spending obviously more money on the French army, on the French Air Force, on the French Navy, because people, you and I, human beings in general, have multiple interests reflecting not just our identities, but our identities are important, including our national identities, but also our material and career identities and our material and career interests, And it's human nature to believe that my interests are not in conflict with each other. So if I'm a French officer in the military, I'm going to believe that there's no conflict between promoting the French military and French military activity in different parts of the world and France's well-being, France's economic well-being, France's prestige and glory in the world, because that's what human beings do. We tend to see a world in a way that is self-serving. Not because we're bad people, that's just what human beings do. So, and so when we focus in this class on Europeanization and European integration, we're trying to build peace in Europe. And again, we go back to the midterm exam that we have here, and make sure that I can share that screen. And if you're trying desperately, after the horrors of the 20th century, trying to build peace in Europe, and you're just not a college professor, but you're a government civil servant in France or West Germany or Italy, what are you going to work with? What are you going to do? What you can do is you can adopt policies that are going to emphasize economic and bureaucratic interests, because that's what you can manipulate. That's what you can change in the form of laws, in terms of adopting and reforming and amending and changing laws, policies. All right, but keep in mind that even though, for example, again, the best case is Britain. Britain was in the European Union for over 40 years. Since 73, so that would be, yeah, 43 years. And all of those vested economic interests, all those efforts to promote a British and European economic mindset in terms of a European market, a European strategy, and all of the interests that were spent and devoted within these companies, reflecting Britain's accession to the European community in 1973, since then till 2016, and all of the bureaucratic vested interests with all of those civil servants in the British ministries, and all of those college students like you studying in British universities about European integration, still were overridden by or overcome by British nationalism. And again, even though Britain is not formally in the European Union, it's still obviously heavily dependent upon European economy. Keep in mind that 50% of Britain's trade is with Europe, right? With the mainland of the European Union. Still, yes, those economic vested interests are still going to be very important, very influential in shaping British policy behavior. But still, we see that, 10 years ago, most people, not everybody, most people in my position, were not predicting that Britain would ever leave the European Union. Right up until the referendum in June 2016, 6 years ago. I think it was in this class. I was teaching this very class. At the end of the semester, because we end in June, I asked my students in June 2016, do you think that the British are going to vote to leave? And most students and me thought, well, no, Britain's not going to leave the European Union. And then, oh my God, they voted to leave. Part of that issue is that, we as college students and college professors, we talk to each other, and we tend to, not always, but we tend to assume that our world is like the rest of the world, and our world is not like the rest of the world. And the mass of the population in these countries, in Britain and Germany and France, they tend to be more prone to be nationalistic than the elite, than the authorities. And so, okay, but we want to make sure in this brief class that we're focused on Germany and France. And that's all by a way by which I'm trying to get to an important point today, that history makes a difference. History makes a difference. And you can say that, oh yeah, it's truly obvious. But what I want to try to explain here is that when we talk about British nationalism, why hasn't French nationalism overridden European integration? Why hasn't German nationalism? Why hasn't Italian nationalism? And I think you already sort of know the answer, because you know that obviously Britain's history and Germany's history and France's history are significantly different with regard to their experience with nationalism. If you're a German identifier, if you're an Italian, if you're French, nationalism, particularly for Germany, How successful has that been as a value to emphasize, to gain your objectives, to satisfy your needs as an individual, as a citizen, as a human being in the 20th century? Nationalism in Germany has a bad history. And that makes a difference in terms of the experience of nationalism. So, or Italian nationalism was exploited by Benito Mussolini and the fascists. And what did that do for Italy? And French nationalism, even the French, they won the First World War, they were on the victorious side, but at such terrible cost that that experience of fighting that war has to be part of any explanation as to why the French army fought so badly in 1940. I mean, France was basically defeated in 1 week during the German invasion. When the German army reached the English Channel and cut France in 2 parts, and you all, I think, might have seen that film that came out a few years ago, Dunkirk, that World War I film. There's even some suggestion that maybe the German army held back to allow Britain to escape because Germany had some hopes under Hitler about persuading the British to ally with him in his crazy worldview about Northern Europeans and together with the Anglo-Saxons focusing their aggression, their efforts against the Soviet Union. And but anyway, the fighting continued for a few more weeks, but in 3 weeks, France had surrendered. And part of that experience was, again, that French nationalism did not appear to be much of a successful orientation or attitude to take in dealing with the problems and challenges confronting French people. But what's the key here? We want to highlight how the British experience with nationalism is very different. I mean, the British never lost. They think that they have nothing to be ashamed of. They didn't lose the First and Second World War. They won both. British nationalism, in this self-serving worldview that nationalists have, they believe that British nationalism saved Europe and the world. When France was defeated, the Soviet Union had not yet been attacked by the Germans. In fact, the Soviets even reached an agreement with Germany, and the United States was not yet in the war because the Japanese had not yet bombed Pearl Harbor on December 1941. Britain was all alone in this romantic image that British nationalists and patriots have. They have nothing to be ashamed about regarding British nationalism. And I know we're focusing this week on Germany and France, but when you read the chapter on Britain in the book, again, I come across from my perspective, when you read these chapters, how the authors are struggling with nationalism, and they're at the same time, they're having difficulty struggling with it because they have difficulty conceptualizing it. But they make that point in the book, in that chapter on Great Britain, that the British have a strong sense of pride in British nationalism. Germany, you're not allowed to be openly proud of your history. No, when I say you're not allowed, you're not going to be a mainstream politician and say, be proud of Germany's glorious history. No German politicians leading in the mainstream party says that, because of their terrible history. But the British, of course, they did do bad things in the 20th century. Ask any Indian nationalist in India what the British did. Disregarded famines in India, let those people suffer when they were supplying the British Empire in their wars against Germany in the continent. But again, nationalists tend to see world as self-serving. If you're a British patriot, a British nationalist, you have nothing to be ashamed of. The European Union, it's a loser's club. It's for countries that were defeated at some point in wars. It's like Alcoholics Anonymous, right? We don't want to, we joined that when we were embarrassed and humiliated by our economic weakness after the loss of the British Empire in the 1940s and 50s. But then we came back finally under Margaret Thatcher and the Conservative Party when she was elected prime minister in 1979. And so this is a way by which to try to conceptualize the relationship of nationalism to people's needs. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, if you go further in business administration, you're going to encounter this. This is an old theory from the 1940s, emphasizing that people have changing needs, and there's a hierarchy of needs. And the most basic need, of course, is the need to survive, safety. And once you guarantee or can take for granted that you're going to survive, you start looking for security and stability in your life. Once you have security and stability in your life, then you're going to take it for granted, accept it exists, and then you're going to be motivated by other drives, like the drive to develop satisfying emotional relationships, love, not just romantic, but satisfying close personal friendships. Once you have those close personal relationships satisfied, then your drives and needs will change and move towards self-esteem, namely getting affirmation from the public realm, from society around you, that you have achieved, that I have achieved, and you should honor me. Career success. And then once you gain recognition of your fundamental worth in terms of a citizen of a community, then you might move beyond that to becoming more individualistic, self-actualization. Okay, you recognize that I've achieved something. Now I don't care so much about what the rest of the world thinks. I'm going to do what I want to do. Help the poor, protect animals, whatever, fight for human rights, self-actualization. And that's, and of course, if you're a manager of a business, of an organization, you should understand that people are going through this process of development in their lives. And if you want to get the most out of your staff and your employees, you want to appeal to their needs. You want to have them view your organization where they are working as a way by which to satisfy these needs. And if you do, they will be enthusiastic and more likely to be fully, highly motivated to contribute to the organization's mission, whether it be in the business world or in the government world. And of course, this, now I know there's a lot of holes in this theory, and you can always find individuals who don't fit this model in terms of how they are willing to sacrifice their own safety and even their survival for others. But when you talk about communities of people like nations, this model looks pretty good. I mean, Germany today in 2022 is very different from the Germany of 1942. Why? Because Germany is stable, it's more prosperous, is at peace, it's more educated, it's more prosperous, as I already mentioned, it's more secure. And so Germany is a country that is more focused on satisfying collectively these needs. And you even have, for example, a Green Party in Germany is one of the major parties that is more focused on what Ronald Engelhardt, the University of Michigan political scientist, called post-material values, green values, environmental protection, gender rights, and so on. So nationalism tends to associate with the satisfaction of these needs. Nationalism is a compensatory phenomenon that people display as a group to satisfy these needs, generally these needs. And so what is the experience of World War II? Obviously, people are born with certain genetic material predispositions. We know, for example, there's a genetic relationship to depression, and there's people who are more genetically prone to addiction, chemical addictions, and that shapes their motivations, and their attitudes are their way by which they respond to challenges from or stimuli from the outside environment, both from individuals and other groups, including their early socialization, right? How you are raised by your caregivers. And then this enters into a systemic equilibrium until you encounter disturbance, and that can be good or bad. You can fall in love, fall out of love. That made a big impact on me in terms of my attitudes. And then, or you go through World War II, or you go through the invasion of Ukraine, and you have Russia bomb your cities, or you go through, you can think of any kind of individual life experience that's shocking, and it generates an altered worldview and an altered value system. But the altered value system in Germany, as a consequence of 2 world wars, was very different from the altered value system that the World War experiences produced in Britain. And so, and that's why, in any kind of explanation as to why European integration has happened, has to include a focus on the elite. And I'm not saying that all French people are not nationalistic, all French people are post-material, or all French people are oriented towards universalistic cosmopolitan values like environmentalism and gender rights, but the elite are. And in terms of this predisposition we see for groups and nations to behave nationalistically, as we talked about in class, there's a checklist that you can use to evaluate the predisposition for Germany versus the evaluation of Russia's predisposition to be nationalistic, or America's predisposition to be nationalistic, or China's predisposition to be nationalistic as nation states. And this is the checklist. And I'm not going to focus too much on it here because we're already, more than halfway through the class. But the belief that that the leaders of the country are expressing or should express their orientation to change and reform Germany, or change and reform their society, or France, or America, and explain and appeal to the mass of the population, to the mass public, that we have to carry out these reforms in order to make Germany great again, or make America great again, make America great again, MAGA, make America great again, or make China great again. Do you evaluate and promote your agenda for change in the society through policy, in terms of explain to the people that this is what we need to do to make America or Germany or China great again? And yeah, in Eastern Europe and in East Asia, where you're at today, yeah, definitely. We have to carry out these reforms in China because we need China to get up off its knees and be the great country that it was until the period of humiliation began in the mid-19th century. Or to make Korea reunified and dignified again the way Korea deserves to be. In East Asia or China, I've already mentioned. Eastern Europe, I told you, even when I was in Bulgaria, as going through these tremendous change processes in post-communist Bulgaria, the democratic, pro-American, European elite was appealing to the Bulgarian people to please accept these revolutionary changes that the new government, the new democratic government, was imposing or implementing, that's a better term, in Bulgaria, because we need to bring Poland back. We need to bring Poland or bring Bulgaria back to Europe. We must return to Europe. We must make Bulgaria European again after 50 years of Stalinist communism. Same for Poland. But in France and Germany, if you're part of the establishment elite, I'm not talking about Marine Le Pen or the Alternative for Deutschland, the AfD, the Alternative for Germany. I'm talking about Angela Merkel and others and Olaf Scholz. If you're going to advocate change, you advocate change to the people in appealing to the people for support, in terms of universalistic values, in terms of human rights, democracy, environmental protection, universalistic cosmopolitan values. And this is critical for understanding the success of European integration. That a change-oriented elite in Germany and France, as the engines of the European Union, advocate change, but they are hesitant, at least at the time of the beginning of the 21st century, are unwilling to justify and legitimate those appeals for policy reforms in Germany and France in terms of making France great again, or making Germany great again. They won't do it. And they are emerging, they are there in Germany, those kinds of counter elites are there in Germany, and they are there in France. But you see, like, for example, this most recent government in Germany under Olaf Scholz and the Greens, the Social Democratic Party and the Green Party, they ally, if necessary, also with the Conservative Party to keep the AfD, the Alternative for Germany, Alternative für Deutschland, out of government, even though they're a big party. They ally in France to keep Marine Le Pen's national rally out of power, even though it's, well, as of the last election, the second biggest party in France. And these other factors for predisposition towards nationalistic behavior include, defense. Do you believe that if your country, if it was sovereign, independent, your people were sovereign, independent, could they defend themselves well? Could they have a viable economy? Are they unique in terms of history, culture, language? And that is a bit of a challenge for Russian nationalism and Ukrainian nationalism today in Europe. There was an article in the New York Times that came out yesterday that I wanted to show you here. Of course, we keep highlighting it. What's this? Somebody's got a chat. Oh, yes, somebody. Yes, thank you, because thank you again for the chat comment, because I got to make sure that I forgot to do Cyber Campus attendance. So let me do that now. And go here and get this out of the way. I can't get it out of the way. Oh, English, okay. And then we go here and we go to, okay, go here, share screen. And where did Cyber Campus go? 1 second. Cyber Campus, log in, like that. And we go here, and we go to European Politics and Society, in attendance. And we're still in week 3, technically. So smart attendance, and your number is 816. 816 is your smart attendance number. So let me go back to the chat function and type in 816. Okay, so that is done there. Here was an article that appeared yesterday in the New York Times regarding these value conflicts over territory. Again, just reading the media reports on this is really interesting, because American journalists, they seem to have a difficulty understanding what we call value conflicts over territory. So, gosh, and I want to make sure we relate this to Germany and France. So here you see a report about how Russian soldiers have gone into Kiev, the capital of Ukraine, and they've come into apartment blocks, and horrible things are happening. And this report notes that 10 Russian soldiers entered this Ukrainian house in Kiev. And it goes on to highlight this case when Mr. Burykov's 70-year-old grandfather, the owner of the house, began to remonstrate or complain with the Russian soldiers about what they were doing in their country. The Russian soldiers told them that they were securing control over what was Russian land, citing the medieval kingdom of Kievan Rus, which Russia claims is its ancestral state. And my grandfather tried to argue. He said, it's rubbish, that it's your land. I was born here, go away. And so these conflicting claims over territory, over what it means to be Russian. Can you be Russian in the early 20th century without Russia controlling Kiev? If you look at this website, I think I pointed this out to you already at the beginning of the semester. You have to be careful about Wikipedia, because companies will, and organizations, they will spend a lot of money to get a nice Wikipedia page that serves their interests. So it looks like this is set up by the Russian government, is what I'm trying to get to in terms of this page, this Russian World website. If you look at it, and what does it say? If you go to the bottom, the Russian Orthodox Church under the Patriarchal of Moscow, the leader, declares that Ukraine is not on the periphery of our church. We call Kiev the mother of all Russian cities. For us, Kiev is what Jerusalem is for many. For Israeli nationalists, Jerusalem is the undivided eternal capital of Israel since Israel conquered it in 1967, when I still remember that war. And the West Bank, the Palestinian occupied territories, that's not what they call it in Israel. They call them Judea and Samaria. They're not going to give that up. And even as the Americans give them $3 billion a year in military aid. They've already settled, several 100,000 settlers have moved there since 1967. They're not going to give up Judea and Samaria. Serb nationalists, Kosovo, that's the cradle of the Serbian nation. And look how that little country of 10 million fought a war against NATO, and they still haven't given up Kosovo. They're trying to partition it. So Americans have difficulty understanding this. And again, you're reading the chapters on France and Germany, and the authors decided they're going to focus on something. They can't talk about everything in the German case or the French case, but there is, of course, a tradition of this kind of value conflict over territory, because the territory defines what it means to be a member of the nation. When you look at, for example, yeah, I think this is it, right? This uniqueness in terms of history, culture, and language. This is where you have territory as part of this history. If people believe that their language, their culture, their territory, that these all overlap with more or less perfect boundaries, that Russia is not Russia without Kiev. And all of those people that fight to oppose Russia holding Kiev, they're scum. They are traitors who have been brainwashed by our enemies. And what do you do with traitors? What do you do with traitors? Kill them if they refuse to submit. I know it's crazy, but we're talking about nationalism. And World War II was the epitome of nationalistic conflicts, and that associates with genocide, stereotyping. I mean, the Germans are not a bad people. They're no worse than anybody else. And look what they did under Hitler. But they weren't the only ones who did massacres and genocidal attacks. And again, political scientists are zoologists who study Homo sapiens. We have to focus less on blaming people, and we have to focus more on peaceful conflict resolution. And nationalism emerges in these contexts. Okay, but again, in the brief time we have remaining, I wanted to get to the point about how there is a case that the authors of the book do not focus on, the authors of your chapters do not focus on, and that is Alsace-Lorraine. Alsace-Lorraine is another historical focus of value conflict in between Germany and France that you don't hear much about, but they fought repeated wars over this territory, Alsace-Lorraine. It was taken by France at the end of the Middle Ages in the 16th century, as from the German lands, and then in 1871, when Germany was being unified under the German Empire here, Germany beat France in the Franco-Prussian War of 1871 and got this territory, Alsace-Lorraine. And then France won World War I, and Germany lost much of this territory, including Alsace-Lorraine. And then Germany beat France in 1940, and they took it back, and they added it to a region in Germany. And then after Germany was defeated in 1945, France got it back. And what is the big city here? We have a couple European students. What's the big city in this region? Strasbourg. Strasbourg. And the European Court of Human Rights, not the European Court of Justice, but the European Court of Human Rights of the Council of Europe, where is it located? It's located in Strasbourg. And once a month, the European Parliament, which is up here, supposed to be based in Brussels, once a month, the entire European Parliament of the European Union goes to Strasbourg and has to hold a plenary session there in Strasbourg once a month, because the French insist upon it to show that Alsace-Lorraine is European and French. It's a big burden. All of the documents and materials that the European Parliament needs to function, they often put on trucks and trains and ship all the way from Brussels to Strasbourg once a month for the European Parliament to have a plenary session there. And the French insist upon this. To this day, even though people say, some observers say, this is embarrassing. How can you really view the European Parliament as an equal branch of the European Union when it doesn't even have one permanent seat? Once a month, everybody's got to move all their papers, they got to rent hotel rooms, they got to all travel to Strasbourg and have a meeting at this European Parliament building in Strasbourg, just because the French want to remind everybody that that territory is European and French. So this is a case about, and of course the Germans, they acquiesce because of their history, because of the desire for other objectives, for peace, prosperity. And it's not really talked about in your chapters for this week, because it's a case of, this is a value conflict that has pretty much receded to insignificance. I mean, obviously, it costs a lot of money to move everybody from Brussels to Strasbourg once a month. It wastes a lot of time, a lot of resources. But of course, the hotel owners, I think it might be mentioned in the French chapter. I mean, the hotel owners and restaurant owners in Strasbourg, yeah, keep coming because we need your business. But again, just to show, this was an important value conflict between France and Germany for 150 years, longer, 300 years. We talk about territorial identity of national conflicts. And there you see it, Strasbourg. I mean, these people, they speak German. They don't speak French. But they're intense French nationalists. It's an interesting case. And again, so we have this conflict in Ukraine and Russian nationalism, between Ukrainian and Russian nationalism over Kiev. Is Kiev Ukrainian? Is Kiev Russian? Is it both? Okay, so let's, in the time remaining, let me ask you to vote on something. And go back to Cyber Campus and vote. And so what do you think? Do you think Russia will eventually acquiesce to the loss of the territory of Kievan Rus as part of the Russian national territorial community, like Germany eventually acquiesced to the loss of Alsace-Lorraine? Can you please vote? Do you think, again, it's a power question. I mean, the Israelis can dream the dream and actually implement the dream of Jerusalem being the eternal united capital of Israel and Judea and Samaria being part of Israel because they have a tremendous power capability over the Arabs for a number of reasons, including American support. And so you can dream that dream. But the Serbs are having great difficulty because of their power capabilities to hold on to Kosovo. And they're not the only case besides Alsace-Lorraine. I mean, we could go on and on and on because these are negative cases. Like, do you hear about the Greeks complaining over loss of Smyrna? Smyrna is Izmir. It's the second biggest city in Turkey today. It used to be Smyrna. For thousands of years, Greeks lived there. Homer, you know, the author of the Odyssey and the Iliad, he was from Smyrna. And the Greeks lost Smyrna. At the end of World War I. And all the Greeks were expelled, ethnically cleansed. Is that going to happen with Russia? Is Russia going to eventually have to give up Kievan Rus and Kiev in their worldview, in their self-serving, understanding of themselves, what it means to be Russian? It's partly a power question. How strong is Ukrainian nationalism? How many allies and friends and supporters does Ukraine have? So there's no concrete answer to this. I just want you to think about it. Do you think that basically Russian identity will have to change and give up Kievan Rus as part of its understanding of their national history? And so some of you agree, some of you disagree. Nationalism. Okay, so let's go back. And so to talk about France and Germany in the brief time remaining. And so we see here that I think this is the notes for France and Germany. And okay, so France and Europe. Of course, France has, you know, its troubles with nationalism. And Charles de Gaulle, you know who Charles de Gaulle was, right? The great French leader of France, president until I think 1969, and then he resigned and died the next year. He had been the leader of the French resistance against the German occupation during World War II. After this tremendous humiliation of the French military being basically being defeated in 3 weeks, the war was finished in 3 weeks. France surrendered, collaborated with the Germans under Vichy, the Vichy government in Vichy, France, under Prime Minister Laval, and Le Pen. I have to find. Well, we're running out of time here to talk about this, but I'll have to find it later. The point was that France was humiliated. And Charles de Gaulle emerges also when France is losing its empire. It lost Vietnam and Laos and Cambodia, and the Americans stepped in and then they would lose. And then they also lost Algeria. And Algeria and the loss of Algeria is as difficult for the French nationalists to accept as the loss of Southern Americans in the southern part of the United States in the Civil War. Again, all this is unspoken, pretty much in your chapters, but trying to use the European Union as a way by which to compensate for French indignity or French embarrassment or French humiliation in the 20th century has been important for understanding the French relationship to the European Union. That France can be great in the world again, as it had been up through Napoleon, through Europe. That French pride and French prestige can play a prominent role in the world, dominated by the United States and its British ally, and now rising China and Russia, by France providing leadership of the European Union. And that has been an important part of the support for Europeanization in France, but it doesn't always succeed. As I said, the French voted down in 2004 the draft European Union Constitution Treaty. They almost voted down in 1992 the Maastricht Treaty. I mean, I was in graduate school when this was going on, and public opinion polls a few weeks before, or a couple of months before the referendum in France on the Maastricht Treaty, at first they said 75% of French people said they support the Maastricht Treaty. And then through the course of the campaign and the demagogy and the fear mongering by the different groups saying France is going to be overrun by poor people coming from other parts of Europe to live in France, it barely passed by like 0.5 percentage point. The Treaty of Maastricht was passed by the French voters in 1992. And then in 2004, they voted down the Constitution Treaty. So nationalism is a challenge in France as well. It's a challenge everywhere in Europe, least so in Germany, but not completely gone in Germany. Germany acts nationalistically too, in, for example, demanding that the Europeans recognize Slovenia and Croatia as independent states, thus removing any opportunity to use that as leverage, recognition as leverage for a new post-Yugoslav constitution to try to prevent civil war from escalating in Yugoslavia. But again, these are all controversial statements I'm making. People get very upset if Germans in denial. We were not being nationalistic. No. To this day, in this event that happened 30 years ago. So, but French individuals played leading roles in the founding of the European coal and steel community. Jean Monnet, European puissance, power through Europe, right? Highlight what I just mentioned, that France can be great again, but it has to be great again through Europe. And continues to the present, that try to appeal to French nationalism because European Union is a way by which France can become the leader of one of the great sources of capability and power in the world, the European Union. Okay, so and Germany, just to summarize so we conclude here, has been restructured since the defeat in World War II within the integration of Europe. And that has made Germany committed to being a legitimate actor, an accepted actor in international affairs, despite the horrible things that Germany did in the Second World War through Europe, through European and Western integration. And partly for this reason, the Germans have never been as supportive as the French for trying to create an autonomous, independent European Union capability separate from the United States, despite French rhetorical commitment to doing that. And most recently, like last week, Germany announced they have to replace their old Air Force Tornado aircraft built in the 1980s as a European joint fighter project, the Tornado. They were all built in the 1980s. What did they decide to do? Create another new European aircraft, fighter jet? No, they're going to buy F-35s from the Americans, just like the South Koreans. Lockheed Martin's F-35, the newest. It's like, wow. And that's what the Russians would say. See this European Union thing? NATO, which means United States, European Union. NATO, European Union. On that note, we have to stop there. So thank you very much. And any questions? And if not, Ani, Kaseo.